If love is earned, then it's conditional. And if it's conditional, then it's like commerce. You're buying affection with good behavior. The relationship then is a transaction. And what you're calling love is really just favorable terms. The alternative is harder to sit with. The alternative is that love is freely given, that it arrives without being earned and stays without being guaranteed.
Welcome to Beyond Success, the podcast for high achievers seeking deeper meaning, fulfillment, and purpose. Now, here's your host, world-renowned leadership coach and therapist, David Tian, PhD.
Most high achievers assume they have separate problems. For example, maybe there's the strategy problem at work, like an unclear market or an unresolved hire or a bet that hasn't paid off yet. And then maybe there's the connection problem at home, like a relationship that's gone stale or quiet, or personal life that doesn't look anything like what they expected it to look like by now. And maybe somewhere in the background there's the creative block, the thing they've been meaning to build, the project that they keep putting off until the timing is just right. These are three separate problems in this example, and they have their own separate fixes, and that's the general assumption. It's reasonable, but it's also wrong. This episode makes one major claim, that these are not three separate problems. They're all the same problem. The capacity that governs whether you can hold strategic ambiguity at work, like whether you can sit with a market that isn't clear, or a decision that doesn't have enough data yet behind it, or a bet whose payoff is still months away, that capacity is actually identical to the one that governs whether another person can actually know you deeply. It's the same capacity that determines whether you can produce anything genuinely original. And it's the same capacity that determines whether your life accumulates into something that means something deeper, or just into like a resume. It's the same single capacity undergirding everything that truly matters. Success selects for a very specific relationship with uncertainty, namely eliminating it as fast as possible. That's often what made you good. You saw ambiguity, you collapsed it into a decision, and you took action. While everyone else was still weighing options, you were already executing. That instinct built your success, your career. But the domains that actually sustain a rich human life, like love, creativity, the question of what any of this really means, that actually doesn't reward that instinct. It punishes it. The faster you try to collapse uncertainty in an intimate relationship, the more you end up controlling it and killing it. The faster you try to collapse it in creative work, the more derivative the output becomes. The faster you try to collapse it in your own inner life, the more shallow everything stays. So the skill that got you here is actively now working against you in the places that matter most. And nobody told you, because from the outside, everything looks fine. Now, if you're hearing this and thinking, I'm good with uncertainty, I take risks all the time, I want to make an important distinction here, because there's a real important key difference between calculated risk and genuine uncertainty. Calculated risk is where you don't know the outcome, but you know the variables. You can model it, you can run the scenarios, you can figure out the expected value and decide whether the bet is worth taking. That's what founders and investors do every day. Genuine uncertainty is actually something else entirely. Genuine uncertainty is where you don't even know what you don't know, so you can't model it. There are no variables to plug in yet. You just have to stay there in that state and space of not knowing, without a framework to make it feel more manageable. Achievers take calculated risks all the time, but very few of them can tolerate genuine uncertainty for more than, a few minutes in their personal lives especially. The moment an intimate relationship feels ambiguous, they want to define it, control it, or leave, flee. There's a second myth that I want to address here briefly. A lot of people believe that uncertainty tolerance is just a personality trait. You're either wired for it or you're not. But that's actually not accurate. It's a capacity, and capacities can be built. Some people do have more baseline tolerance for sure. The same way some people have more cardiovascular endurance that they were born with before they ever set foot in a gym. But endurance itself is trainable. It's a capacity. And so is this, the tolerance for uncertainty. The problem isn't that you can't develop it. The problem is that nobody has ever asked you to or shown you how to. Your entire life, you've been training yourself to resolve uncertainty faster, to close the loop, or make that call, or move on, be decisive. Not once, probably, has anyone suggested that the skill worth building is the ability to stay in that state. So, let's start with where this inability to stay with the uncertainty shows up first and most painfully and most commonly. Okay, let's start with intimacy. Here's a way to think about what intimacy actually is. Intimacy is the experience of being known by someone who is free to leave you. If they can't leave you, it's actually not intimacy, it's captivity. If they don't know you, it's not intimacy. Then it's just like performance. Which means that intimacy is, by definition, uncertain. It has to be. You can't secure it without destroying it. The moment you lock down how someone sees you, you've replaced a relationship with a contract. Whether spoken or unspoken, implicit or explicit, conscious or unconscious, it's a contract. The moment you guarantee that they will stay, you have replaced love with obligation. And then you'll never know for sure whether they'd still be there if they were actually truly free to go. Most high achievers understand this intellectually, like they'll nod along with it, but they don't live it. What they actually do is manage perception. They edit themselves. They present the version of themselves they think will be loved, accepted, approved of, that will ensure that the other person stays. And then, and this might sound brutal, they resent the partner over time for loving someone who doesn't fully exist. Because on some level, they know that the person she loves isn't really me. It's the version I constructed for her to keep her in, to keep her there, to keep her staying. Or, and this is the one no one talks about, they choose partners who are unlikely to challenge them. Someone who won't ask them hard questions, who won't see past the surface. Not because they actually want a shallow relationship, like nobody wants that, but because a shallow relationship is the only kind that doesn't trigger the uncertainty that they can't tolerate. A partner who really sees you, through you, into you, is a partner who might not like what they see. And that possibility is unbearable for someone whose entire identity runs on being impressive. So what's actually happening here psychologically? When you let someone truly see you, not the curated version, not the safe version, but the real one, the true one, the authentic one, you hand them information that they could use to reject you. That's the risk. That's what's on the table. And your nervous system registers this as danger. For someone who built their identity around competence and control, being truly seen would feel like exposure. Vulnerability is not some warm, soft experience for these people. Instead, it's a threat. It's something to manage, something to contain, something to neutralize before it does real damage. So they do what they do best. They manage. They steer conversations away from anything authentic or vulnerable. They perform closeness without actually being close. They say the right things at the right moments. They check the boxes. And the whole time, they're actually alone. Not because nobody's there, but because they won't let anybody in. The tolerance for uncertainty required here is actually specific. Can you let someone see you, truly, without knowing in advance that they'll still love what they see? Okay, that's the test. And most people who run companies worth 9 figures actually can't even pass this. Now, I want to sit with a question here, and this goes beyond just psychology. Is it possible to deserve love? Because that's the hidden assumption running this whole pattern. The belief that love has to be earned, the way grades are earned, or the way a promotion is earned. That if you perform well enough, if you show up correctly in the right way, if you do all the right things, then love is the payoff. It's what you get for being good enough. But follow that logic a bit more for a second. If love is earned, then it's conditional. And if it's conditional, then it's like commerce. You're buying affection with good behavior. The relationship then is a transaction. And what you're calling love is really just favorable terms. The alternative is harder to sit with. The alternative is that love is freely given, that it arrives without being earned, and stays without being guaranteed. And that idea is genuinely terrifying to anyone whose entire self-concept is built on earning things, because it means the single skill they trust the most, which is like performing well enough to secure certain outcomes, actually has no power here. None. You cannot perform your way into being genuinely loved. You can only be seen and hope. That's the uncertainty at the center of every intimate relationship. And it's not a flaw in how love works. It's a feature. It's not a problem to be solved or a variable to be optimized. It's logically non-negotiable. Love that's certain isn't love. It's a contract with, emotional language. The uncertainty is the ingredient that makes it authentic, real. For example, my wife and I tell each other, and try to mean it, that you're free to leave at any time. So each day we actually renew our commitment to each other, mentally, emotionally, often not out loud, because we don't force the other person to stay in the marriage against their will. So if you think that at your wedding, right after the vows, you think to yourself, ha-ha, gotcha, you can't leave now, ha-ha. Well, maybe legally now it's more troublesome to leave, but when it comes to love, the wedding vows actually make no difference, because in a true love marriage, you have to renew your commitment every day, sometimes multiple times a day if it's a especially trying time, because you each have the freedom to leave. You must have the freedom to leave, because real love, by definition, cannot be earned or forced or coerced. It can only be freely given. And for an achiever who has spent 20 years building a life around eliminating uncertainty, as fast as possible, that's not just uncomfortable to imagine, to understand this concept of love. This is taken as an identity level threat, because it means the one domain that matters most to them as a human being is the one domain where their greatest professional skill is actually useless. Now, let's take that same capacity and move it into a different domain. Let's take creativity as an example. And I don't just mean art here. I mean creativity in terms of strategy or problem solving or building anything genuinely new or innovative. The creative process requires a sustained period of not knowing. And that period is exactly where most high achievers actually bail out. Let me put it bluntly. Most creative output from high achievers actually isn't creative at all. It's often more like recombination. They take frameworks that they already know, remix them slightly, and then call it innovation, which is fine for incremental improvement. There's nothing wrong with making something a little bit better. But recombination never produces anything that actually changes the game truly. And the reason this happens is straightforward. They won't stay in the uncomfortable phase long enough. The uncomfortable phase is the part before the creative insights, the part where you don't have an answer and you don't know if one is coming, the phase where the problem feels formless and you can't pattern match your way out. It's the phase everyone wants to skip, but it's the phase that every genuinely original idea in history came through. Nobody skipped that. Not Einstein, not whoever built the thing that you most admire. They all sat in the formless phase and stayed there until something new emerged. So what's happening cognitively when you sit with an unsolved problem? Your brain generates anxiety, and that anxiety is actually a signal. It's your system telling you that resources are being allocated to something without a guaranteed return. Sometimes the real problem isn't more effort or more motivation. It's knowing the right direction. A lot of people listening to this podcast are capable and driven. Things still look fine on paper, but life still feels strangely flat. When that happens, more advice usually isn't the answer. Clarity is. I've put together a short assessment that takes about 2 minutes. It's simply a way to see which area deserves your attention most right now, whether that's relationships, decision-making, or how pressure is being handled day to day. Based on your responses, you'll be sent a short set of masterclasses related to that area. If that sounds useful, you can find it at dtphd.com/quiz. That's dtphd.com/quiz. For someone optimized around efficiency, someone whose whole career has been about deploying resources effectively or getting measurable results, this probably feels like a waste. It feels like you're failing in real time. So what do most smart achiever types do? They grab the first plausible answer and then run with it. Not actually because it's the best answer, but because it stops the discomfort. The decision isn't in service of the work, it's in service of their own nervous system. Unconsciously, of course. They'd rather have a mediocre solution now than sit with the possibility of a great one that hasn't arrived yet and they have no idea when it will. And that trade-off, comfort now versus quality sometime later perhaps, is invisible to most people who are making this trade-off. They think they're being decisive. They think they're moving fast, the way they've always moved fast. But the willingness to stay in that state of not knowing, to let the problem stay open, to resist the first good enough answer, that's what separates original work, creative work, from forgettable work. And it's the same muscle as the one required in intimacy. Can you stay in an unresolved space without forcing a resolution? There's a great irony here. It's like trying not to try. Wu-wei, effortless action. The insight you're waiting for cannot arrive while you're grasping for it. It's like trying to see something in your peripheral vision by looking directly at it. The moment you turn your head, it moves. That's how creativity works. True creativity, not just recombination, but the genuine thing, requires a kind of relaxed attention. Not laziness, not passivity, but a willingness to be present to the problem without demanding or forcing that it solve itself on your schedule. This is, by the way, like I've mentioned, what every contemplative tradition has been trying to say in its own way. The Taoist concept of wu-wei, or the Buddhist notion of non-grasping, or the Christian mystics' dark night of the soul, they're all pointing at the same actual thing. The best things arrive when you stop clutching for them. Not when you stop caring, when you stop clutching for them. There's a difference, and this is really important. Caring without clutching for it is attention without demand. And that's the state where original ideas can actually surface. But for someone who built everything by clutching, by gripping tighter, working harder, forcing outcomes, this isn't just an uncomfortable idea, it's an identity threat. Because if the thing that made you successful is the thing that's now preventing your best to work, your next big breakthrough, then who are you without that old strategy of forcing? And this is also, by the way, why so many successful companies plateau. The founder who can't stay in that state of not knowing ends up building an organization that can't either. So ambiguity gets punished. People learn to bring answers, not questions. The whole culture gets optimized for fast resolution, which means that every genuinely hard problem, the kind that requires sitting with it, turning it over, mulling it over, letting it marinate, letting the non-obvious solutions surface, that gets solved with the first adequate response instead. The company that can't tolerate uncertainty at the top ends up producing competent but predictable, unremarkable work and products, just like the person now running it. Okay, so we've looked at intimacy, we've looked at creativity as examples. Now let's take the same capacity into the deepest domain, meaning. So here's a question worth sitting with. What makes a life meaningful? Not productive, not impressive, meaningful. Because those are different things, of course. And most high achievers have been treating them as if they were the same thing, and doing this for decades. Productivity is measurable. You can track it, optimize it, put it on a dashboard. Impressiveness is comparative. You can rank it against other people and know where you stand. But meaning is none of those things. You can't benchmark it. You can't A/B test it. You can't look at someone else's meaningful life and then reverse engineer it for yourself, because meaning, true meaning, is non-transferable. What makes your life meaningful might bore someone else to tears, and what lights up someone else's life might leave you cold or hollow. Which means that figuring out what a meaningful life looks like for you requires, once again, sitting in uncertainty. But this time, it's existential uncertainty, the kind where you're asking questions that may not have clean or clear answers, and you have to keep living while you wait. Most people avoid the meaning question entirely, and the reason for this is straightforward. They're terrified of what the answer might be. What if the career I gave everything to actually doesn't matter to me? What if the thing I'm supposed to be doing is something I haven't even started yet? What if the life I've built, the one that looks great on paper, the one everyone else admires, isn't actually my life? Those questions create massive uncertainty. And most high achievers deal with them the same way they deal with uncertainty everywhere else. They collapse it. They pick an answer fast. My meaning is my kids, or my meaning is my company, or my meaning is my legacy. And then they just stop asking, because the question was already too uncomfortable to hold. But meaning that's been grabbed in a hurry, just to stop the discomfort of the question, that's not real meaning. It's a coping strategy that you're trying to disguise as a philosophy of life, and it doesn't hold water. It might work for a while. It might work at dinner parties or in conversations with friends over beers or something. It works until 3 a.m. on a random Tuesday when you're staring at the ceiling and the question comes back, and the answer that you grabbed doesn't feel true anymore. Because it was never true, it was just fast and felt decisive. Now, let me pull these 3 domains together, because the capacity to tolerate uncertainty is not 3 separate skills applied in 3 separate areas of life. It is one single capacity, and its presence or absence runs through your entire life like a fault line. If you can't tolerate uncertainty in intimacy, you end up controlling your relationships. If you can't tolerate it in creative work, you produce competent but derivative output. If you can't tolerate it in the question of meaning, then you end up settling for someone else's answer in someone else's life. And the common denominator is always the same. The discomfort of not knowing feels so intolerable that you'll take any resolution over staying open to it. A bad answer feels better than no answer. A managed relationship feels safer than a real one. A recycled idea feels more productive than an empty page. Think about this. The founder who can hold a $50 million ambiguity at work, who can sit calmly with a market that isn't clear, or a product bet that hasn't landed yet, or a board that's asking hard questions that he doesn't have answers for yet. That same founder probably can't hold a 5-second silence after his wife says, "I don't feel connected to you anymore." He can't stay in that space. He has to fix it, or explain it, or deflect it, or leave the room. He doesn't have a work skill and a relationship deficit. He has one capacity, unevenly applied. And until he sees that, he'll keep solving the wrong problems. And the professional cost of an unlived meaning question is specific. The leader who hasn't answered it for himself yet builds toward goals that he inherited instead of goals that he consciously chose. He optimizes a machine that he never asked whether he wanted to be running. He ends up hitting targets that someone else set, maybe a mentor or a parent, or just the default trajectory of his industry. And then he looks back and calls that success because it looks like success from the outside. And the people around him can feel it, the gap between his competence and his conviction. They follow because he's good at this. They don't follow because he believes in it. And that difference matters more than most leaders realize. It's the difference between an organization that people stay at and an organization that people tolerate until something better comes along. So let me bring all of this together. I brought up 3 domains as examples: intimacy, creativity, and meaning, and they are all governed by one capacity. They're not 3 separate problems. They're one, and it's the tolerance to stay in an unresolved space without forcing an exit. Achievement probably trains you to exit fast. That probably is what made you successful. But the things that sustain a life require you to stay, and the professional life you built doesn't sit in some separate compartment. The same deficit that cost you depth at home cost you trust, originality, and conviction at work. Here's an example. I worked with a man a few years ago, early 40s, built a company that most people in his industry would recognize. He sold a stake that made him rich enough that he never had to work again if he didn't want to. And he was single. And he wasn't recently single. He'd been single for most of his adult life. Not because he couldn't attract women, but because every relationship followed the same arc. Things would start well, but the moment it got close enough that she might actually see into the real him, not the founder persona, not the public version, him, his true self, his authentic self, he would find a reason to end it. You would be too busy, or hey, it's the wrong timing, or she just wasn't quite right. I can't explain why, but she just wasn't right. Always a reasonable explanation, but never the true one. The true one was that he couldn't tolerate being seen deeply without knowing in advance what she would think of what she saw. So he kept choosing situations where that test never came up. Casual flings, short relationships with women who wouldn't push him. And professionally, the same pattern started showing up over time. His team brought him answers, but never real questions, until he found out later and then would chastise them, and then they would say, "We were trying to bring you answers." His company had stopped producing anything truly innovative after a very long time. He was optimizing a machine that he'd built years ago, and only very recently had he ever stopped to ask whether he still wanted to be running it. His life looked great from the outside, but from the inside, it was overly managed, distant, and shallow. And he knew it, and that's why he found me. If you don't build this capacity, here's what stays with you. The relationships stay managed and distant. The work stays competent but forgettable. The meaning question stays unanswered, but the worst part isn't the emptiness, it's the actual awareness, because you're smart enough to know that something's missing. You can feel that gap, but you just can't tolerate the uncertainty long enough to find out what's in it. That's the trap. The very intelligence that lets you see the problem is, without this capacity, the intelligence that keeps you from solving it. You'll analyze it, you'll theorize about it, you'll read about it, you'll talk about it at dinner parties. You'll do everything except sit with it long enough, deeply enough for something real, authentic to emerge from it. But if you do build it, the opposite happens. Relationships where someone actually knows you deeply, not the LinkedIn version and not the dinner party version, the true you. And creative work that surprises even you because it comes from a place where you didn't plan. A sense of meaning that wasn't grabbed in a hurry, but arrived at slowly, gradually, the way real things do. Not because you forced an answer, but because you were willing to live inside not knowing the answer to that question. And the professional life changes too, not because you learned some new framework or hired a better team, but because the person at the center of the whole operation finally stopped performing and started leading from something truly authentic. Good people feel that. Good teams feel that. The work gets better because the person doing it got more honest. That's what tolerance for uncertainty gets you, not comfort, something far better than comfort. A life you don't have to manage because you finally stopped needing to.